There is a particular kind of cold that lives only in the memory of warmth. Not the cold of space. That is something else entirely. Something that does not belong to the vocabulary of human experience yet, something we are still inventing words for. But the cold that settles into your hands the moment you realize you are holding something for the last time. The cold that climbs up through your fingers when you place them flat against a kitchen counter and understand, in the marrow of a single quiet second, that you will never touch this particular surface again. That the scuff on the corner of that counter, the one you always meant to fix with a bit of sanding and a coat of paint, the one that caught the afternoon light in a way that made it look almost like a scar the house had chosen to keep, you will never look at it again. And somehow, out of all the monumental things you have prepared yourself to lose, it is that small imperfection on a kitchen counter that breaks something open inside you. We did not expect that. We had rehearsed the grief for the big things. We had walked ourselves through the mental theater of goodbye, the faces of the people we love arranged in our imaginations like a gallery we were closing for renovation, not demolition. We told ourselves, not demolition. And we thought we had prepared adequately. We thought we had done the emotional arithmetic, and arrived at a number we could carry. But grief is not arithmetic. Grief is a language with no consistent grammar, and it chooses to speak to you in the most unreasonable dialects at the most unreasonable moments. And so it was the kitchen counter that undid us, not the farewell speech, not the final photograph, not even the last embrace that went on slightly too long, and not nearly long enough. There was coffee that morning. There is always coffee at the edge of the precipice, isn't there? There is something almost cosmically appropriate about the fact that coffee, that ancient, aromatic, deeply human ritual of grinding and brewing and breathing in the steam that rises like a small private weather system, should be the last communion we share with the world we were born into. You held the cup the way you hold a small animal, 2 hands curled around its warmth, and you pressed it to your face before you drank from it, pressing the ceramic against your cheek, feeling the heat transfer through the thin wall of the cup into your skin, letting the smell move through you like a chord you hadn't heard in years but knew every note of. Ethiopian origin, medium roast, brewed too strong the way you always brewed it, with that slight edge of bitterness that caught at the back of your throat and then released into something almost sweet. That is earth, distilled, and you were drinking it for the last time, and somewhere in the part of you that is older than language, you knew. You knew. The morning light was doing something particular through the window, the way morning light in the specific geography of your home had always done something particular, the way light is always specific to a place, always shaped by the angles of the walls and the height of the trees and the texture of the curtains that have softened with washing over the years until they are less fabric than memory. That light moved across the floor in a stripe of gold that seemed almost deliberate, almost designed, as if the day itself were making a final gesture of beauty for you, as if the ordinary world were trying to remind you, in its voiceless way, what you were leaving. What you had always had, so quietly and so completely, that you had never thought to call it miraculous. The fact of a morning in a room. The fact of warmth and light and coffee and the particular smell of a place that is yours. The miracle of the unremarkable. And then the sound of a key turning in a lock, and you need to understand, you need to really let this land somewhere inside you, what that sound means when you know it is the last time. The mechanics of a lock are so simple, so indifferent, the tumbler turning in its chamber with that small, precise, domestic click that you have heard thousands of times and have never once really listened to. Have never once stopped to experience as the sound of belonging, the sound of enclosure, the sound of the world closing around you in an act not of imprisonment but of shelter. And you stand there on the wrong side of that door for just a moment too long, and you listen to it, the click of the lock, the small finality of it, and you breathe once, deeply, and you do not look back at the window with its stripe of gold, and you do not think about the kitchen counter, and you begin to walk. The faces of the people who came to see you off are another country of grief entirely. They are standing there in the blue-gray of an early morning that belongs to airports and departures and the kind of goodbyes that exist in the register between words, and they are trying to compose their faces into something supportive, something proud, something that says we believe in you and not please don't go, though of course both things are true simultaneously and both things are legible in their eyes if you are willing to look, and you are, and you do. You look at the face of everyone who has ever loved you and you try to memorize it the way you might memorize a piece of music, not just the melody but the texture of it, the particular quality of the silence before the first note, the way certain passages feel when you close your eyes and stop trying to understand and simply let it move through you. There is a particular quality to the last look into someone's eyes. It is different from all the other looks that have passed between you across all the ordinary and extraordinary moments of a shared life. It is slower, and it carries a kind of weight that ordinary glances are not built to carry, and yet it holds everything, every conversation, every silence, every moment of mutual understanding and mutual bewilderment, every time you made each other laugh until the world disappeared for a few seconds, every time you sat in the same room doing separate things but were somehow deeply, quietly together. All of it compresses into that single-held gaze, and then you look away, because you have to. Because if you do not look away now you will never leave, and you have made a promise to something larger than you understand, and so you look away, and you carry the weight of that look with you, and it does not get lighter. It does not get lighter. The ship is waiting. The ship has always been waiting, in some sense. It is the physical embodiment of a question you have been asking yourself since the first time you looked up at a night sky and felt that particular vertigo of scale, that dizzying recognition that you are very small and the universe is very large, and somewhere in the arithmetic of those two facts there is either terror or wonder, and you have chosen, with the full and deliberate weight of your personhood, to call it wonder. The ship is waiting. You walk toward it. And somewhere behind you, the world that made you stands in the blue-gray morning and watches you go. What is a ship, really, when you have left everything behind? We need to sit with this question for a while, in the way that you sit with questions that have no comfortable answer, not pacing, not searching for the door marked resolution, but simply sitting with the weight of the thing, letting it press against you and be felt. What is a ship when it is not a means of travel but a means of survival? When it is not the vehicle of your adventure but the entirety of your world? When the ship is everything, every breath of air, every calorie of food, every photon of warmth, every millimeter of protection between your soft biological body and the absolute indifference of a vacuum that would end you in seconds without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without any recognition at all that you were a person who had a life and a kitchen with a scuffed counter and a particular way of brewing coffee? You learn the ship the way you once learned a city, not from a map but from walking, from repetition, from the accumulated geography of daily life. The particular angle of the corridor that leads from your quarters to the observation deck. The way the light changes as you move through different sections. The utilitarian fluorescence of the maintenance corridors giving way to the softer, more considered illumination of the living spaces, a design choice made by people who understood that humans are phototropic creatures, that we orient ourselves by light, that we are in some deep and ancient way creatures of the sun and that in the absence of the sun we need at least its approximation. The way the floor vibrates slightly beneath your feet in certain sections, a low-frequency tremor that is not alarming but constant, the heartbeat of the ship's systems expressing itself through the soles of your feet, a kind of mechanical pulse that becomes, over time, so familiar that its absence would be more disturbing than its presence. The smell of the ship is something no one prepares you for adequately. It is clean, in the way that laboratories are clean, aggressively, artificially, persistently clean, with an undertone of something metallic that lives in the back of your nostrils no matter how many times you breathe in and try to breathe it out. The air is recycled, of course, processed and filtered and returned to you bearing no trace of its own history, no accumulation of the organic signatures that fill a living space over time, no slow build of coffee and cooking and the particular human warmth of bodies and breath and the indefinable biochemical poetry of a life being lived. The air on the ship has no memory. And you do not realize how much of your sense of home, of belonging, of temporal orientation, How much of your understanding of yourself as a continuous person moving through a continuous life, how much of all of that is carried not in your thoughts or your memories but in your nose? In the constant unconscious act of smelling the world you inhabit and reading it for the thousand small signals of safety and familiarity and belonging, until those signals are gone and the air is just air in it. Tells you nothing about where you are or who you are or whether you belong here. The titanium holds everything. This is the fact that you return to again and again, in the small hours when the ship's lighting has cycled to its night mode and the corridors are dim, and you are awake in a way that is not quite wakefulness, the fragile, half-dissolved state of a person whose sleep has been interrupted by their own thoughts, and you are acutely, almost unbearably aware of the reality of your situation. The titanium holds everything. On the other side of these walls there is nothing. Not nothing in the poetic sense, the philosophical nothing, the nothing that invites meditation, but nothing in the absolute literal physical sense, an absence of matter so complete, a pressure so non-existent, a temperature so extreme that the concept of the human body existing within it is not merely uncomfortable to contemplate but incompatible with the basic requirements of the human body as a functional system. You put your hand against the wall sometimes, in those half-awake hours, and you feel the cold of the metal. It is always cold, the inner surface of the wall, always exactly cool enough to remind you without belaboring the point that outside is something other than inside, that the distinction between inside and outside here is not merely architectural but existential. You press your palm flat and feel the slight hum of the ship's systems, the recycling, the climate management, the thousand small processes that constitute the artificial ecology that keeps you alive, and you think about frailty. About the human body as a remarkable and extraordinary and yet terrifyingly contingent thing, a system of overlapping biological processes that require a very specific set of physical conditions to function, conditions that exist in almost no other place in the observable universe, conditions that are, you understand this now in a way you never quite did when you lived surrounded by them. Conditions that are a miracle, that are statistically improbable, that are the result of a 4 billion. Your sequence of unlikely events on a small rocky world in an unremarkable corner of a galaxy that is one of hundreds of billions. The machines never sleep. This is one of the things that marks the most fundamental difference between a ship in the void and any structure you have ever inhabited on Earth. The silence of the night. The particular quality of nighttime quiet in which the world seems to rest, to reduce itself to a minimum, to breathe slowly and give you the gift of its stillness, that is gone, entirely gone, replaced by the constant vigilant hum of systems that cannot afford to rest because rest would mean death. The ship breathes for you and you breathe for the ship, in a way. There is a codependency here, a mutual necessity, that is unlike any relationship you have ever had with a structure before. A house is a shelter. A ship in the void is a partner in survival. A house can stand empty for a week and nothing changes. The ship cannot stand unmonitored for 10 minutes without someone running down a checklist. You are responsible for it, and it is responsible for you, and the two of you are alone out here in a darkness that has no bottom. And in that darkness, you begin to understand something about the relationship between a human being and a container. Every home you have ever lived in has been, in a sense, a container, a bounded space that defined the limits of your immediate world and gave you the gift of edges, of walls you could see from any point in the room, of a ceiling that said, this far and no further, and in that finitude there is safety, there is scale, there is the reassurance of a world that fits the human body. But the walls of the ship, for all their physical reality, for all their inches of titanium and insulation and the thousand engineered layers of protection they represent, the walls of the ship do not contain the world in the way that the walls of a room contain it. Because just beyond those walls the world does not continue in any form that is legible to a human nervous system. The world stops. And what replaces it is not the next room or the street outside or the sky above or even the stars. The stars are there, yes, more stars than you have ever seen, a density of stars that would be beautiful if your beauty receptors weren't so overloaded by the adjacent fact of the immensity. What replaces the world is an absence so total that it functions, for the human mind, not as emptiness but as a kind of anti-presence, a thing that is felt not as nothing but as the absolute negation of everything. It comes to you in waves, the doubt. Not steadily, not in a form that you could track and manage and argue yourself out of with the prepared list of rational reasons that you assembled, in advance, for exactly this purpose. It comes in waves, like grief, because it is a form of grief. It is perhaps the deepest and most unreasonable grief, the grief for a choice you made with full agency, with both eyes open, with the passion and the conviction of someone who has found their purpose and is walking toward it with all the weight of their personhood behind them. You chose this. You wanted this. And you grieve it anyway, because wanting something and losing something can occupy the same moment without contradiction, because the human heart is large enough to hold both the desire and the mourning of the thing desired, and to hold them simultaneously without resolution. The faces come to you unbidden in those hours. The faces of the people who stood in the blue-gray morning and watched you walk away. And the faces are different now than they were in memory, which is to say the faces are the same. You remember them with extraordinary precision, the specific way that light fell across a particular cheekbone, the exact quality of a particular pair of eyes in the exact moment of a particular goodbye. But the context in which you hold them has changed, is changing, continues to change, and so the faces that were, in the moment of departure, a source of sadness and love and the complicated intersection of the two, those faces have become, in the slow passage of the journey, a source of something that is harder to name, but that presses on the chest in a different and more specific way. They are older now. This is the thought that arrives without warning and lands with a weight entirely disproportionate to its length. They are older now. While you have been here, sealed in this artificial environment, in this loop of recycled air and constant mechanical hum, and the white noise of the systems that keep you alive. Eating the same carefully calculated meals and sleeping in the same carefully regulated cycles and aging at the pace of a body in low gravity. While all of that has been your reality, time has continued on Earth in its ordinary, indifferent, biological way, and the people whose faces you carry inside you have been living in it. They have had mornings you did not share, coffee you were not present for, seasons you did not witness, the particular quality of the first autumn afternoon when the light goes golden and the air carries that dry sweetness that belongs only to October, and you love it before you even consciously register that you are loving it. They have had hundreds of those mornings and you have had none of them. They have had bad days and good days and the unremarkable days that make up the overwhelming majority of any life, the days that are mostly forgettable and yet are, in their accumulation, the actual texture of existence. They have laughed at things you were not present to find funny. They have been sad about things you did not know were happening. They have developed new habits, formed new opinions, arrived at new understandings of themselves and the world that you had no part in facilitating and no knowledge of, and in that absence you have been growing strange to them and they have been growing strange to you, and the strangeness is not hostile and not chosen, it is simply the natural and inevitable consequence of time passing differently in different places, of lives diverging along the lines that circumstance and choice and distance draw between people who once occupied the same small geography of daily life. Did they watch the sky, some nights, and think about where you were? Did they go outside, on the clear nights, and look up at the stars, and somewhere in that vast and scattered light try to find the direction of you? And if they did, and you believe they did, you need to believe they did, it is one of the small faithfuls that you carry as ballast against the weight of the doubt. If they did, what did they feel? Pride? Terror? The complicated love that is specific to watching someone you love walk into a danger they have chosen freely and that you cannot share and cannot protect them from? Was it worth it, we ask ourselves, and then we ask ourselves whether that is even the right question. Worth is a unit of measure that requires a common currency, and the currencies on either side of this particular equation, the enormous, specific, irreplaceable value of a shared human life with the people who love you, played out in the dailiness of ordinary time, on the surface of the world that made you, and the other thing, the thing you went toward, the pull of the undiscovered, the need to be one of the ones who goes, who reaches, who stands at the edge of the known and takes one more step. These two things do not have a common currency. They are not commensurable. You cannot weigh them against each other and arrive at an answer, and anyone who tells you otherwise has not yet understood the question. And yet we came. We are here. We made the choice, with full knowledge of its cost, and we are in the middle of it now, and the doubt comes in waves like grief, and we ride the waves because there is no other option, and between the waves we look out at the dark and we remind ourselves why. But the dark is very dark, and the distance is very long. And sometimes, in the honest quiet of the middle of the night, when the ship hums its constant mechanical lullaby and the recycled air moves across your skin with its metallic non-memory, sometimes it is hard to remember why. Sometimes the why is not a feeling but a formula, not a lived thing but a remembered argument, and there is a particular species of loneliness that lives in the gap between those two things, between the felt truth and the argued truth, between the heart and the position paper. We are not telling you this to frighten you. We are telling you this because it is true, and because the truth, even when it is hard, is the only currency that does not devalue with time. There is no silence on earth. Not really. You have thought you experienced silence, in a forest at dawn before the birds have started. In a room with the windows closed in the deep middle of a winter night, in the moment just before sleep takes you when the world reduces itself to the rhythm of your own breathing, you have thought you knew what silence was. But what you knew was the relative quiet of a world that is never actually quiet, a world that is vibrating with constant, layered, overlapping sound at every frequency, a world in which silence is not an absence but a presence that only appears when the louder things step back for a moment and let it be heard. What you knew was the silence that lives inside sound. Out here, there is a different kind of silence. Out here, the silence is not the space between sounds but the ground state of reality. Sound requires a medium, vibrating air, conducted through matter, and in the void there is no medium, and so there is no sound. There is not even the absence of sound, there is simply a condition in which sound is not a possible phenomenon, and you cannot hear this silence because hearing is itself a phenomenon that requires what the silence here represents the absence of. What you experience instead is something interior. The silence of the void is experienced not with the ears but with the nervous system, with the skin, with the deep animal parts of the brain that evolved over millions of years to be alert to the environment, to read the constant sensory text of the world and parse it for danger and safety and nourishment and social connection and all the thousand things that an animal needs from its environment in order to survive. Those systems are active out here, running their ancient assessments, and the inputs they receive are nothing. The cosmic silence is not heard. It is felt as a kind of background hum of wrongness, a constant low-grade signal from the oldest parts of your mind that says, this is not where you are supposed to be. What is a human being, stripped of the Earth's context? This is the question that the silence asks, and it asks it without cruelty and without malice, the way that a mirror asks it, with perfect indifference, simply by showing you yourself without the usual furniture that ordinarily surrounds and defines and partially constitutes you. On Earth, you are embedded in context. You are a node in a network of relationships, with other people, with places, with the weather, with the time of year, with the specific quality of the light in a specific city at a specific hour of the afternoon. You are a creature of reference points, and your sense of who you are is not entirely self-contained but is partly constructed from and reflected back by all the things that are not you but that relate to you. Strip away the city, the season, the light, the other people, the sounds of traffic and birds and wind in trees and the 10,000 ambient signals of a world that is alive and inhabited and familiar. Strip away all of that, and what remains? A biological system of remarkable complexity, certainly. A consciousness with a history and a set of values and a collection of memories. But also something strangely unword, something that keeps reaching for the context that used to be there, and keeps finding nothing to hold on to, a hand extending toward a wall that isn't there, a foot searching for a step that has disappeared. The void teaches you this, that identity, as you have known it, is partly relational. That the self is not only what is inside the boundary of your skin but also the space between yourself and the things that surround you, the quality of your relationship to the world you inhabit. And out here, the world is not absent. You understand intellectually that the universe is incomprehensibly vast and incomprehensibly full of matter and energy and phenomena of extraordinary complexity and strangeness. But it is radically, devastatingly inaccessible to you, and inaccessibility is, for practical human purposes, the same as absence. You can see the stars, but you cannot be in relationship with them. They are not a world you inhabit but a backdrop you contemplate, a painting you are moving through, and there is a loneliness in that distinction that is unlike any other loneliness you have ever known. The void is a mirror. This is the insight that the silence offers when you are willing to receive it. The void is a mirror, not a reflecting glass but the kind of mirror that removes all pretense and all distraction and leaves you with only what is essentially, irreducibly, inescapably you. What do you want, in the cosmic silence, when everything else has been stripped away? What matters to you, when there is no social performance required, no audience to perform for, no immediate need to manage? What are you, when you are only yourself? Most people are not prepared for the answer to this question. Most people have spent their lives in the comfortable noise of the world, the glorious busy distraction of other people and responsibilities and pleasures and the constant forward motion of a life being lived, and that noise is not inauthentic, it is not a lie, it is in fact the texture of what being alive actually feels like. But it does prevent certain questions from being asked and certain answers from being heard. The void removes that noise, and in the removal creates a space that is, simultaneously, the most terrifying and the most honest space you have ever inhabited. The philosopher who has not been to space cannot teach you what the space philosopher teaches with its simple, total, unrelenting fact, that in the end, it is all very quiet, and in the quiet, there is only you, and the question of what you are is not answered by what you do or what you own or how other people see you or any of the usual reference points of a life embedded in the human world. And in that confrontation with the fundamental unresolvability of the question, there is something. That might be wisdom, or might be despair, or might be both of those things pressed together into a single experience that your existing vocabulary does not quite have a word for. And yet the universe is beautiful. This is not a comforting thought, exactly. It is not the beauty of something warm and welcoming, the beauty of a home you are glad to return to. It is the beauty of something immense and ancient, and utterly indifferent to your response to it, the beauty of a force of nature. A beauty that does not require your appreciation, and would continue to exist in exactly the same form if there were no consciousness anywhere in the cosmos to perceive it. It is the beauty of mathematics, perhaps, the cold, structural, formal beauty of a pattern that is true whether or not anyone is watching, the beauty of a proportion that holds in the dark, the beauty of a law that operates in the silence with the same precision it operates in the observed and catalogued and celebrated. But also, it is enormous. And the enormity is, when you allow yourself to actually feel it rather than merely think about it, one of the most overwhelming experiences available to a human nervous system. Look out the observation window on the right night, in the right frame of mind, which is to say, in the frame of mind that you have available to you when you are very tired and the ship's night cycle is deepest and the part of you that maintains the daily cognitive fortress of ordinary sanity has stepped back for a moment to rest. Look out in that state, and what you see is not a picture of stars, not a photograph or a planetarium display or any of the representations of the night sky that you have looked at throughout your life and found beautiful. What you see is the actual night sky, the actual universe, in a form that is not filtered through an atmosphere or diluted by light pollution or reduced by the framing of a window that a house contains, but is simply there, present, full. The stars are not points of light from here. They are, you struggle for the word, and language keeps failing you, Language keeps offering you the vocabulary of the familiar, the metaphors and images developed over millennia of human experience of a sky seen from a surface, and none of it quite fits the reality of what you are seeing. The stars are presences. They are discrete, and yet they are part of a continuous field, a field of such density in certain directions that it becomes less like individual objects and more like texture. Like looking at the grain of a very beautiful piece of wood from very close, like watching the movement of light on water from a great distance. And behind that texture, behind the foreground of more local stars, there is a depth that you feel more than see, a recession into further and further distance, layer upon layer of galactic structure that represents time as much as space, because the light from the farthest things you can see has been traveling toward you since before Earth existed, since before the sun ignited, since before the materials that would eventually constitute your body had been forged in the hearts of stars that lived and died and returned their contents to the void. You are looking at history. Every direction you turn, you are looking at history, and the history is not archived or preserved or held in a case behind glass. It is present, right now, arriving at your eyes in the form of light that is still traveling from its origin point, still crossing the darkness, and it is reaching you now, in this moment, and you are its destination, the place it finally stops after its incomprehensible journey. And there is something in that, some quality of significance, of meaning, of improbable rightness, that makes it hard to breathe in a different way than the difficulty of breathing in low oxygen. The universe does not care about you. We need to say this clearly and hold it without flinching. The universe does not know you exist. The universe is not arranged for your benefit or your comfort or your comprehension. The universe is not a narrative. It is not moving toward a conclusion. It does not have a perspective on its own existence. It is not watching. It has never watched. The 400 billion stars in this galaxy are burning without intent, moving without purpose, generating light and heat and the complex chemistry of stellar evolution without any consideration of the small and fragile and extraordinarily temporary biological systems that have, in one small corner of one galaxy, developed the capacity to be aware of them and feel things about them. And yet, and here is the great and irresolvable and magnificent paradox, something in us reaches toward it. Something in us, something very old and very fundamental, something that predates language and civilization and perhaps even our specific species. Something in us looks at the universe and feels, not just sees, not just processes, but feels, with the full depth of whatever it is we mean when we say the word feelings, something. Something that is not comfort and not terror but partakes of both, that is not beauty and not dread but contains the seeds of each. Something that might be called awe if that word hadn't been used so casually, and so cheaply that it has lost some of its original weight, the weight of a word that once meant something close to holy terror, something close to the edge of what the mind can contain without breaking. We are the universe looking at itself, some people say, and it sounds like a platitude until you are floating in the middle of the void looking at the actual universe and you feel it, not as a metaphor, not as a poetic statement, not as a comforting philosophical idea, but as a literal physical fact, that the atoms in your body are made of the same matter as the stars, that the processes that maintain your consciousness are governed by the same physical laws that govern the movements of galaxies, that you are continuous with what you are looking at in a way that is more than metaphorical, more than spiritual, more than imaginative. You are literally made of it, you are a local organization of it, a temporary and highly improbable configuration of matter that has developed, through a sequence of events that is still not fully understood, the capacity to be aware of the configuration it is part of. This thought does not make the loneliness smaller, but it makes the loneliness feel less arbitrary. If we are the universe's capacity to know itself, then even the loneliness is the universe's loneliness, the universe experiencing, through the narrow aperture of a human consciousness, the vast silence of its own interior. The absence that lives at the heart of the most populated cosmos imaginable. The first time you see it, you are not ready. You are never ready, and you know you will not be ready, and you have tried to prepare for that unreadiness, to make peace in advance with the dissonance between your imagination and the reality, between the image you have carried in your mind, assembled from photographs and descriptions and the long work of your own anticipation, and the actual object, the actual moon, hanging there in the actual dark with a specificity and a presence that no image can prepare you for. But knowing you are not ready and being not ready are different things, and when Europa first becomes more than a point of light, when it begins to resolve from abstraction into actuality, you are simply not ready. It is not what you imagined. This is always true of real things, isn't it? The real thing is always slightly wrong relative to the imagined thing, always off in some direction, larger or smaller, more specific in some ways and more ambiguous in others, arranged differently relative to its surroundings, lit differently, moving differently, always, in some way that is hard to articulate, other than anticipated. And this otherness, this quality of not quite what you expected, is not a disappointment exactly, though it contains something in the vicinity of disappointment. It is more like the specific experience of encountering actual reality after extended engagement with its representation, the experience of the room after reading the description of the room, the face after seeing the photograph. Europa is, first, the color of cold. This is the thing that strikes you before anything else, before the scale of it, before the geometry, before the slow comprehension of what you are looking at, the color. It is pale, but not pale the way snow is pale, not pale the way ice in a glass is pale. It is pale in the way that something very old and very still is pale, in the way that bone is pale, in the way that certain kinds of grief are pale, with an undertone that is not quite blue and not quite yellow and not quite anything your chromatic vocabulary has a name for. A color that seems to exist only in this particular quality of reflected light from a sun that is diminished by distance, a sun that, from here, is a point of extraordinary brightness but not warmth, a source of light but not of what you have always associated light with, not the warm, immediate bodily generosity of a nearby sun but something cooler and more abstract, something that illuminates without embracing. And then, as you come closer, the lines are wrong, in a way that is deeply, viscerally wrong in a manner you need a moment to identify, and then you identify it. They are too large. The scale is impossible to comprehend from a distance. You know intellectually how large this moon is, you carry the number in your head, but numbers and reality maintain a persistent gap in the human mind, and it is not until the lines resolve into features, until what appeared to be thin scratches on a pale surface reveal themselves to be vast rifts in the ice. Immense cracks through a crust of frozen water that stretches to both horizons and beyond, that the scale begins to land. These lines are not decorations on a small object. These lines are larger than continents. These lines are the visible record of a process, of a moon being kneaded by the gravitational forces of its enormous parent planet, Jupiter, whose presence you can feel now in a way that you could not at a greater distance, whose bulk dominates the sky in a way that is almost biological, almost like the presence of a very large animal in a room. A pressure and a shadow and a sense of mass that reorganizes all other spatial relationships around itself. Jupiter is the reason Europa may hold what we came for. Jupiter is the reason the ice flexes and cracks and refreezes and flexes again, over and over, in an endless gravitational choreography that generates, in the depths beneath the ice, heat. Not the heat of a nuclear furnace, not the heat of a star, but heat enough. Heat enough to keep water liquid. Heat enough to maintain an ocean. An ocean. The word arrives in your mind and you let it sit there and you look at the surface. The cold, pale-lined surface. The frozen silence of a world that is -200 degrees at its face. The frost and the crystal and the eternal stillness of the ice. And you think about what is beneath it. You think about water. Liquid water, in the dark, under perhaps 30 kilometers of ice, an ocean that has never seen the sun, an ocean that has existed in absolute isolation for longer than life has existed on Earth, an ocean that knows nothing of the sky or the light or the upper world, An ocean that has been preserved in its darkness like something precious, wrapped in layers of extraordinary cold and placed in the safest place imaginable. Which is to say, the most inaccessible place imaginable, which amounts to the same thing. The approach changes you. We notice it happening and we cannot stop it, and we are not sure we want to stop it. The shift in the nature of the attention, the reorientation of everything we are and everything we think we know, toward this new object, this new possibility, this thing that has been waiting in the dark long before any human mind existed to imagine it, long before any human eyes existed to see it, long before the concept of ocean or the concept of life or the concept of water had been assembled by any consciousness anywhere in the cosmos. It has been waiting here, under its ice, in its dark, patient in the way that only completely unconscious things can be patient, without expectation, without impatience, without any awareness of its own waiting. It has simply been. We begin to think about depth in a new way. We have stood at the edge of the ocean on Earth. We have felt the enormity of it, the way it moves toward the horizon in a direction that continues past what can be seen, the way it moves under the surface in a vertical direction that the mind resists comprehending fully because the mind prefers a world it can stand on, a world with a floor it can reach. We have felt this, and we have called it enormous. And by the standards of our experience on Earth, it is. But now, approaching Europa, we think about an ocean that is not spread across a surface but sealed beneath one, an ocean that is circumscribed not by continents and shores but by ice above and rock below, an ocean that exists in a complete and perfect isolation, a system unto itself, a world within a world, and the word enormous is not adequate anymore. The word enormous is a word for a thing you can see the edges of, even if you cannot see them all at once, and this is a thing whose edges are sealed away from every form of perception, enclosed in absolute dark, accessible to nothing and no one. How deep is that water? How much pressure lives at the floor of an ocean that has no shore and no surface? What does the darkness at the bottom of that ocean look like? And we know as we ask the question that it does not look like anything, because there is no light down there, not a photon, not a reflection, not the faintest bioluminescence, unless, of course, unless. And here the mind catches itself at the edge of the thing it has been circling since the journey began. The thing it has been approaching the way you approach a door behind which you are not certain what you will find. Unless there is something down there to generate it. We need to talk about what we are actually hoping for, because we have not said it plainly yet, and there is something in the human character that resists saying plainly the things we hope for most, as if the act of articulation might jinx them, as if the universe might be listening and might, upon hearing the explicit desire, arrange itself specifically to deny it, and we know this is not how the universe works. We know the universe does not listen, and yet the superstition is old enough in us to exert a hold, and so we have been circling the thing without naming it, approaching it from every angle except the direct one. Life. We are hoping for life. We are hoping that in the dark, under the ice, at the bottom of an ocean that has never been touched by sunlight, in conditions that would kill every large organism on Earth and most of the small ones, in pressures that exceed anything the surface of our world subjects its inhabitants to, in cold that sits just above the threshold of freezing, we are hoping that something is alive. Something chemical. Something metabolic. Something that takes matter and energy from its environment and uses them to maintain itself, to reproduce, to persist against the universal tendency toward disorder. Something that, by the technical definition if not by any other definition, can be called alive. We know what this would mean. We carry the knowledge of it like something too large for the pocket we've been trying to put it in. It won't fit, it keeps pulling at the seams, it keeps insisting on its own enormity even as we try to carry it casually, to hold it lightly. We know what it would mean if there is life in the ocean of Europa. It would mean that life is not the improbable exception but the almost inevitable expression of matter and energy given sufficient time and sufficient complexity of conditions. It would mean that the universe is not a desert with one oasis, Earth, our impossible and beloved Earth, but a system in which life is woven, is latent, is present wherever the conditions whisper the right invitation. It would mean that we are not alone. And we would know, in that moment, that we have never been alone, that our loneliness has been a failure of perception and not a fact of reality, that the universe has been full this whole time of the same basic drive toward complexity and self-perpetuation and the chemical argument that says I persist, I continue, I have not yet resolved back into the undifferentiated. And that drive has been occurring on an ocean floor under 30 kilometers of ice while we were building our cities and writing our poetry and making our coffee and turning our keys in our locks and saying goodbye to the people we love. And if we are not alone. But we are not there yet. We are still approaching. The ice is growing larger in the window, the pale lined surface of it filling more and more of our visual field until it is no longer a moon against a background of stars but a ground, a terrain, a thing you could theoretically stand on, a world with the full weight of worldness about it, and the scale of it is pressing on us, the scale of what is beneath it is pressing on us, and the question has stopped being theoretical. We think about the ocean. We close our eyes and try to be in it. The attempt is partly imaginative and partly something more, something that lives below imagination, something that is the mind's attempt to model what it has not experienced and may never experience directly, to build a simulation sufficient to generate not understanding but feeling, not comprehension but contact. We try to be in the ocean under the ice. We try to feel the specific quality of a darkness that is not the darkness of a room at night, not the darkness behind closed eyelids, but the darkness of a place that has never known the possibility of light, a darkness that is not the absence of what was there before but simply the condition, the given, the basic fact of the environment. A darkness so complete and so old that it would have no reference point from which to understand its own darkness even if it were capable of understanding anything at all. What moves through that water? Does anything move through that water? The currents, perhaps. The thermal convection from the rocky floor where tidal heating creates something that might, in the dark, resemble the hydrothermal vents we know from the deep ocean on Earth, chimney-like structures from which superheated mineral-rich water pours into the surrounding cold, creating the chemical gradient that, on Earth, supports entire ecosystems that never touch the surface, never receive a photon of sunlight, live entirely on the energy of the Earth's interior and the chemistry of the vent fluids. Is the same thing happening there? Are there structures in that dark, from which something pours that is hot and chemical and different from the surrounding water, and around those structures, is there life? We do not know. We are here, and we are descending, and we do not know. The ice fills the window now. From up here, at this distance, the surface of Europa is a frozen ocean in the geological sense, not a metaphor but literally a layer of water ice, a crust above a liquid world, a membrane that separates two realities, the one above it being in communication with the universe and the one below it being entirely sealed away, entirely interior, entirely self-contained in a way that no natural environment on Earth can quite match. The lines and ridges and the chaos terrain, the regions where the ice has fractured and refrozen in disordered patterns, where the geological record of repeated breaking and healing is written in the surface like the scars of a life fully lived, all of this is becoming legible at this distance. All of this is becoming real in the way that proximity makes things real. In the way that you can know a thing intellectually from a great distance, and then you can see it, actually see it, and it becomes something else, something that is felt as well as known. There is a theory. There are many theories. But this is the one we hold closest because it is both the most scientific and the most poetic, which is perhaps not a coincidence. Perhaps the most accurate descriptions of the universe have always been the ones that are simultaneously precise and beautiful. There is a theory that the ocean of Europa is in contact with the rocky floor, and that this contact creates conditions not merely warm enough and wet enough but chemically rich enough to support not just microbial life but something more organized, something that, given 4 billion years in a stable liquid water environment, might have had time to do what life did on Earth, to complexify, to differentiate, to arrange itself into patterns of increasing specificity and capability. 4 billion years. Earth is approximately 4 billion years old, and in that time it went from a sterile rock cooling from formation to an ecosystem of inconceivable richness and variety and interdependence, to a world where there is a life form that builds ships and travels to other moons and thinks about what might be underneath the ice. 4 billion years is a very long time in the business of life. And Europa's ocean has been liquid for approximately the same period. What might have happened in that time in that dark? The question is not rhetorical. We are not asking it for effect. We are asking it in the same way that a scientist asks a question, which is to say we are asking it in a state of genuine not knowing, a state in which any answer is possible and no answer has been confirmed, a state in which the universe is still, technically, a mystery, and we are approaching the place where the answer lives, if there is an answer, and the approach feels like nothing so much as the moment before the turning of a lock, the moment before the door opens, the moment that is full of every possible version of what might be on the other side. We are very close now. The ice fills everything. From this distance, the surface of Europa is not a landscape in any sense that the word landscape usually implies. It does not invite the gaze in the way that a landscape invites it, does not arrange itself into the visual grammar of horizon and sky and the middle distance where things happen, does not offer the eye a path. It is simply a field, vast and pale and crossed with its ancient lines, a field that extends to all edges of perception and beyond, and beneath it. We have been thinking, this entire journey, about the things we left behind. About the coffee, and the lock, and the faces in the morning. About the recycled air, and the titanium walls, and the particular quality of loneliness that the void teaches. About the doubt that comes in waves, and the beauty that is cold and immense and indifferent, and the questions that the silence asks and does not answer. We have been thinking, this entire journey, in the language of loss, the loss of earth, the loss of the ordinary, the loss of the context in which we knew who we were. We have been oriented, this entire journey, backward toward the thing we left. And now, for the first time, we are turning forward. And the thing we are turning toward is under the ice, and we do not know what it is. This is the moment. Not the arrival. The arrival will be practical and technical and overwhelming in its own right, a cascade of things to do and decisions to make, and the physical reality of a surface landing on a world that does not welcome biological life on its exterior. Not the arrival. This moment, now, approaching, is the threshold moment, the moment before the threshold, the moment in which everything is still possible and nothing has been determined, the moment in which the question is still fully open and the universe has not yet declared its answer. We brought ourselves here. We brought our grief and our doubt, and our coffee memories and our faces in the morning and our loneliness and our awe and our barely sustainable hope and our restless need to know. We brought all of it here, across the void, through the silence, along the path of a question that is billions of years older than the species asking it. We brought our souls here. We brought the particular quality of human consciousness, this strange recursive self-aware experiencing process that emerged, somehow, from the same matter as the stars. We brought it to the edge of an ocean that has been waiting in the dark since before we existed. But the ocean does not know we are coming. The ocean does not know anything. The ocean is either full of life that has spent 4 billion years developing in perfect isolation, or it is full of the richly chemical but entirely lifeless water of a world that came close but not close enough, that had all the right ingredients, and the right conditions, and the right amount of time, and yet, nothing. It is one of those two things, and we do not know which one, and in the moment before we find out, both possibilities exist simultaneously, and we are suspended between them in a state that is neither terror nor hope but something that contains both and is larger than either. What does it mean to be the first? What does it mean to be the ones who go to the edge of the ocean that has never seen a living face, that has never had a surface, that has never had a shore, and to ask, are you alone? Have you always been alone? Or have you, in your billions of years of darkness, been becoming something? Have you, in your patient unlit depths, been doing the slow work that matter does when the conditions are right and the time is sufficient, the work of becoming more, of organizing and replicating and differentiating and complexifying until the chemistry of the ocean has given rise to something that, in the most ancient and essential sense of the word, can be called alive? We do not know. And that not knowing is the most extraordinary thing we have ever carried. The ice is 20 meters below us now. 15. The instruments are reading, the systems are processing, the ship is doing what it was built to do, and we are at the window, our hands pressed flat against the cold surface of it, our breath making small temporary clouds of condensation on the glass, and we are looking down at the ice, and we are thinking about what is beneath it, and we are thinking about the people we left in the blue-gray morning who loved us and aged without us. And we are thinking about the coffee that tasted like earth, and the lock that sounded like belonging, and we are thinking about the silence of the void that asked us what we are, and we are thinking about the 4 billion years that have passed in the dark beneath us, and we are not sure, we are genuinely, profoundly, completely not sure, whether we are about to find the most important thing in the history of our species or whether we are about to find only ourselves, reflected in the dark water of a world that spent its entire existence alone. Both of those things would change us. Both of those things would be an answer. Both of those things would mean that the journey was worth something, not in the currency of the cost, not in the arithmetic of loss and gain, but in the deeper sense, in the sense that matters when you are very far from home and the ice is 10 meters below you and your hands are cold against the glass and the ocean is waiting in the dark and the universe is not watching but you are. You are watching. We are watching. We are the universe watching itself in the most literal sense available to us right now, from this specific position, at this specific moment, in this specific state of not knowing that feels like the edge of a word that has never been spoken in any language that has ever existed. Something down there, beneath the ice, in the cold and the dark and the ancient liquid silence. Something either is or isn't. And we are about to find out which. And we are not ready. We have never been ready. We go anyway.